Okay, so last week we talked about Isaiah. How uplifting was the book of Isaiah for the most part?
The basis of the gospel in a lot of ways.
There are messianic parts in there that redeem the rest of it. Most of the book is doom and destruction on Babylon, Edom, Israel, Judah, and other nations. But fortunately, there's Isaiah 53 and other places where it talks about there's going to come a time when the burden will be lifted. Your sins, though they be as scarlet, they'll be as white as snow. And so there's definitely a wonderful hope when the Messiah comes. And that's exactly why so much quoting is done in the New Testament of the book of Isaiah. And so it was a little bit discouraging reading through so much of the parts where it just talks about, but what I'm doing it just so we'll get the idea that not following God has consequences, and they can be very dire consequences. And if Isaiah was doom and destruction, Jeremiah is doom and destruction on steroids. It's even worse. And so today we'll look at Jeremiah and the other book that he wrote, Lamentations. And just from the name of the book, Lamentations, you can kind of guess that's not going to be real uplifting either. But start with, remember this material as it's written is from somebody else, but he does a pretty good job. And so rather than try to put it all in my own words, I'm reading from his description of these prophets. And I may have changed a few things along the way, but not much. Anyway, Jeremiah's ministry extended from 626 to 586 BC. Now, one of those dates should be really familiar to you. Anybody want to offer up a suggestion? Which one of those two dates? Actually, I don't know if I can find it real quick, but let's look at this for a second. Nope, got to get the red pointer. Okay, right here you see a date, 586, Babylonian captivity. It started in 606 when the king and some of the cream of the crop were taken off to Babylon. And then in 597, there was another rebellion. More of them were taken away to Babylon. 586, Nebuchadnezzar had it, and he came and totally destroyed Jerusalem, Judea, took everybody, all the rest of the people to captive, except for just the dregs of society that a few of them remained in Jerusalem. And so 586 is a really important date because just like 722 BC is a really important one because that's the Assyrian captivity. 586 is when the Babylonian captivity was complete. And then 536 is when they came back out of captivity. And this is where it can get a little bit confusing because you always want to remember 586 because this is when it really was complete. But how long was the Babylonian captivity? 70 years. And you go back from 536, you add 70 years to that. Do you get 586? No, you get 606. And so the 70 years started from the time the first captives were taken into Babylon, not when the last captives were taken into Babylon. So some of these people from 606 to 586 is 20 years. Some of them only stayed 50 years.
So if I'm figuring this right, Jeremiah only lived to be 40 years old.
No, this was the time that he prophesied.
Okay.
He prophesied during these years. So he was an old man when he died. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. But anyway, so the 70 years of captivity goes from 606. That's why we put all three of these dates in, because the captivity started and then more were added, taken off, and then finally everybody was taken off in 586. But so it goes from 606 to 536 was what the 70 years was. And it was preceding this 586, and several kings before 586 is when he prophesied. And so I wonder if I don't know if there's a way to get back to where I was really easily, but anyway, 626 BC. So it was after the Assyrian captivity, but before and right up to the time of the complete Babylonian captivity is when Jeremiah, that was his time of prophesying. And his whole purpose was to tell the people of Judah, you're out of here. Might as well give it up because you're going. Don't even bother praying to God or any of that stuff. It's already cast in stone. You're going, just get ready. And somehow the people didn't like that message. And so you can kind of guess maybe Jeremiah wasn't super popular. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But anyway, he was a prophet of doom who, upon God's command, never married. So he didn't ever get married, and that was because God says, don't get married. Why do you think he's told him not to get married? Did Paul say something about that? 1 Corinthians 7. If you're unmarried, stay that way. Because of what? Because of the present distress. And if they had a present distress then, which they definitely did, same thing was just about to happen to Jerusalem in Paul's day as was about to happen in Jeremiah's day. And so Jeremiah is told, don't get married. Things are going to be bad, and they're not going to be easy on you, and therefore they wouldn't be easier on your wife. So don't get married. His words were written down, not by himself, but by his secretary, Baruch. And they are characterized by self-analysis and self-criticism. So in quite a bit of it, he talks about his own self, but through another writer. But anyway, his denunciatory tirades against his enemies, seeking redress, and his long complaints express the kind of life he lived. Well, as you can tell, I didn't write that. I would have worded it a little bit different. But anyway, basically, he goes on these tirades against his enemies, and he asks God, come on, pour fire from heaven down or whatever, give me some relief here. That just gives you an idea of the kind of life he had to live because of the message that he was preaching. It says that he says then he is justly termed the weeping prophet. And part of that is because of the book of Lamentations, lamenting things. And so he's called the weeping prophet, by scholars and other people. He prophesied in Judah during the troubled reigns of Josiah. If you remember, Josiah began to be king when he was real young, and he did pretty good at the beginning, but then he trailed off. And it was during his time that Jeremiah was prophesying, trying to give him some advice, which he later quit taking. Anyway, so he prophesied during Josiah's reign, and Josiah being a kindred spirit who died fighting the Egyptians. He also prophesied during the time of Jehoiakim, who persecuted him and ruled during the siege of Jerusalem. So it was Jehoiakim who ruled during the siege of Jerusalem in 605, the very first one. And it was Jehoiakim that got taken off to Babylon along with Daniel, and the educated ones, the cream of the crop. And then he also, okay, well, I need to finish this sentence. It was Jehoiakim who persecuted and ruled during the siege of Jerusalem in 605 by Nebuchadnezzar after the defeat of the Egyptians at the Battle of Carchemish. Battle of Carchemish is a real famous one that took place. The Babylonians were heading to Egypt, and Egypt didn't want to wait till the Babylonians got there. So the Pharaoh Necho, went up, and they met each other at Carchemish, which is a little bit north of Israel. And a huge earth-shattering battle took place there, and the Egyptians lost. But Nebuchadnezzar didn't keep going after Egypt. And anyway, it was during this battle that Josiah thought he was trying to do the right thing, help the Egyptians against Babylon, because the prophets were saying Babylon was gonna take out Judah. And so he went to help Pharaoh Necho, but that wasn't a good idea. These alliances with other nations were never okay with God. And anyway, he died. He was killed. And so then the next king was Jehoiachin, and then Zedekiah. Neither one of them were any good, and they didn't like Jeremiah. And that was the time period between 597 and 686. And then he ended up fleeing to Egypt at the end of his life. When everybody was taken captive, he left. God allowed him to go the other direction. He fled to Egypt. But next sentence, according to tradition that is preserved in extra biblical sources, he was stoned to death by his exasperated fellow countrymen in Egypt. So, not a happy story. His own people stoned him to death because he preached the message they didn't want to hear. We're going to talk about that part there in just a minute. Well, no, we're not. We're going to talk. I'm going to mention it in my lesson. I'll just say it here because it's germane. Know anybody else that was stoned and left for dead? Stephen, and anybody else? The Apostle Paul in Lystra, he was stoned. They thought they stoned him to death, but he was dead. God raised him up. So if what happened to these people then, they were destroyed because of the way they treated the prophets, and then how did the people treat the prophets in the New Testament times? Any better? No better. Should we be surprised what happened to Jerusalem in 70 AD? Shouldn't be surprised at all. And it shouldn't surprise us in the least that the very last message that Jesus gave, the revelation of Jesus Christ, would talk about, and it says in the first chapter, it's the avenging of the apostles and the prophets, God getting vengeance because of what they had done. He was getting vengeance for that in this destruction in 586. Why would the book of Revelation be talking about Rome, which no place in the Old Testament ever talks about Rome other than in Daniel's prophecy that in the days of these kings, the Messiah would be raised up and everything. So much is said about Israel and Jerusalem. It makes so much more sense to understand the book of Revelation that he's talking about, look, I'm coming after you guys, and it's because of what you have done to every single prophet. Jesus even says it in his own ministry. Which of the prophets have you not persecuted? Beginning with Abel all the way through to Zechariah. You've persecuted them all. Now your house is left to you desolate. God's gone. We'll talk about that. We have to talk about Matthew 24 before we talk about Revelation also. So we got a lot of stuff coming along. But this totally sets the stage for that. And that's why we're reading all this stuff. Okay, so Jeremiah denounced the sins of his countrymen and prophesied the judgment and destruction of Judah. Israel was already gone. So now he's prophesying that Judah is going to be destroyed, Judah to come, as well as the wrath to fall on Babylon, Moab, the Philistines, and others. So just like Isaiah had prophesied bad stuff to happen to these other nations, Jeremiah does it too, but he's emphasizing Judah the most. He emphasized the value of repentance, the importance of individual responsibility, and the restoration and renewal that would later follow. The oracles in the book are not arranged in chronological order. So if you read the book of Jeremiah, it's not necessarily in chronological order. So you got to keep that in mind when you're studying it. But it's interesting that he emphasizes the importance of individual responsibility. It starts with me, starts with you. The nation's not going to change until individuals collectively change, then the nation will change. It doesn't go the other direction. So anyway, the next thing this guy says, he talks about Jeremiah's call. And now we're getting into quotes from the book of Jeremiah itself. Notice right here it says 1:4 and then 16:1. He's quoting and he's telling you where these quotes come from at the end of each little quote. So as far as Jeremiah's call, God says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I set you apart. I appointed you as prophet to the nations. You must not marry and have sons or daughters in this place." So that's God calling Jeremiah, and he just takes a few. This guy that is writing this takes a few excerpts. Notice the ellipses, the three dots means he's just taking the meat of it and to try to get the main ideas across rather than quoting the entire scriptures. If you go through it yourself, you can see what is left out. But this tells you in essence about his call by God. And then he wants to talk about the sins of the people, quoting Jeremiah. "Your wickedness will punish you. Your backsliding will rebuke you," from chapter 2:19. "But you have lived as a prostitute with many lovers." Book of Revelation have any prostitute in it? Yeah. And so if the book of Revelation is anything like the book of Jeremiah, maybe when he talks about a prostitute, he's talking about an unfaithful, that's what a prostitute is, an unfaithful woman. Maybe he's talking about the nation, not an actual woman. Not just maybe, that's exactly what's happening. Jesus is taking passages that they were totally familiar with in the Old Testament to show this is exactly the same as you people are right now. And he's writing in apocalyptic language because he's exiled on the island of Patmos. These people, the Romans, have no clue what he's writing about. I mean, anybody picks up the book of Revelation and reads through, what are they going to say? What is this? This is crazy. Well, he wrote it that way for a purpose, so the message could get out, but it's coded with phrases from the Old Testament that the people that needed to hear it, needed to get this message, would understand exactly what he's talking about. And so anyway, there's so many phrases in Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, Ezekiel, the other prophets that are borrowed or that are incorporated in the book of Revelation. You'll never understand the book of Revelation if you don't know how they're used in the Old Testament, because that's where they come from. So anyway, he says, I'm talking about Judah. You have lived as a prostitute with many lovers. What are the lovers? Idols, foreign countries where they try to make these alliances with. They are well-fed, lusty stallions, each neighing for another man's wife. Has this house, which was the temple he's talking about, which bears my name, this house that bears my name, become a den of robbers to you? And so he's talking about the unfaithfulness of the people of Judah. And you can see they had made the temple a den of thieves. Any reference to a den of thieves in the New Testament? Yes. So it's so important to know the Old Testament so that these things in the New Testament can really mean something to you. Anyway, can the Ethiopian change his skin? What color of skin do the Ethiopians have? Yeah, it's a black race, and that's why he used them. He's not saying anything bad about being that color, but can you change it? No, not any more than a person can decide they want to be a girl if they're a man, or want to be a boy if they're a girl. You can. That's how you're born. You can't change that. I mean, you can cut yourself up and get these operations stuff. But a boy is still a boy, and a girl is still a girl. A black person is still black, and a white person is still white. Whatever. You can't change those things. He says, "Can the Ethiopian change his skin, or the leopard his spots? Neither can you do good who are accustomed to evil." It's so ingrained that it's like a person's skin. You can't change it, and you cannot change it. And that's why I'm telling you, you might as well give up and be ready to go into captivity, because that's what's happening. This is what's going to happen. I will scatter you like chaff driven by the desert wind. Cursed is the one who trusts in man, who depends on flesh for his strength. But blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord. That's why God told the people, you can't have chariots. I want you to trust me, not those chariots. The chariots were like the tanks of the modern age. And he says, you don't need that. You got me. Leave those things out. And here he's talking about depending on the flesh for their own strength. But he says, blessed is the man who trusts the Lord. He will be like a tree planted by the water. We have a song that we sing, just like a tree planted by the water. I will not be moved. Anyway, that's where that comes from. This person that's like a tree planted by the water does not fear when the heat comes, because he's right there. Being from Arizona, I know a little bit about when the heat comes, and they have these, I wish I could think of the name of it. Places where the river runs along. There'll be a bunch of cottonwood trees and green stuff right near the river. That happens in Missouri too, now that I think of it. Or not Missouri, but up in northeast Montana where we lived. Barren as could be everywhere. Rolling hills full of wheat, and that's all. But along the river, they have a first flood plain and then a second one. But in that first flood plain, there's just tons of growth. They get their water from the river, but you go another 150 yards and nothing can live unless it's watered by something else. And so anyway, you don't have to worry if your roots are right next to the water. He says, like clay in the hand of a potter, so are you in my hand. He says, I can do whatever I want with you because I'm the potter, you're the clay. I can mold it and make it just whatever I want it to make. Then he said, well, I need to go back for a second. This is him talking about the sins of the people and their relationship to God. And God's telling them, I'm the boss. I'm in charge here. And if I say it's going to happen, it's going to happen. And if you people don't live like you should, it's not going to be good. And so then he talks more about the disaster ahead. From the north, that he's talking about Babylon, disaster will be poured out on all who love in the land. A lion has come out of his lair. A destroyer of nations has set out. The whole land will be ruined. I will destroy the daughter of Zion, which is Jerusalem, so beautiful and delicate. Teach your daughters how to wail. These nations will serve the king of Babylon for 70 years. So that's where the prophecy of 70 years comes from Jeremiah. And that's exactly how long the people were in captivity in Jeremiah or in Babylon. Now talking about Jeremiah's own suffering, he says about himself, "Oh, my anguish, I writhe in pain. Oh, the agony of my heart. Since my people are crushed, I am crushed." So he felt for the people, even though they weren't being very good to him. He felt for them. Since they're crushed, I'm crushed. I mourn and horror grips me. Is there no balm in Gilead? Isn't there some healing balm I can put on and make myself feel better? Oh, that my head were a spring of water and my eyes a fountain of tears. I would weep day and night for the slain of my people. That's the kind of man Jeremiah was. These same people that put his eye, or that stoned him to death, he cared for those folks, and they would never see it. Now he talks about his enemies. I had been like a gentle lamb led to the slaughter. I did not realize that they had plotted against me. Let me see your vengeance upon them, for you have committed my cause. King Jehoiakim cuts up Jeremiah's prophetic scroll. This is not the quote ends right here. Now the guy that wrote this is talking. King Jehoiakim cuts up Jeremiah's prophetic scroll. Jeremiah, Baruch is writing this scroll, and Jehoiakim doesn't like it. He just cuts it up in pieces. And then Zedekiah's men imprison him in a cistern because he counsels surrender to Babylon. He's saying, give it up, folks, give it up. You're going, might as well not even fight it. And Zedekiah doesn't like that. And coincidentally or not, Zedekiah was the last king before total destruction came. But anyway, they put him in a cistern because he was saying you might as well surrender. But he also, just like Isaiah, had a messianic section or more, had messianic references. Jeremiah says this: the days are coming when I will raise up to David a righteous branch, a king who will reign wisely. In his days, Judah will be saved. When does it say Judah will be saved? In his days. That means when he's living on the earth. This is when it's not going to happen 2,000 years after Jesus came and went. It's going to happen in his days. And so what kind of a kingdom are we talking about? Spiritual kingdom. Jesus himself said, my kingdom is not of this world. If it was, my servants would fight, but it's not. How did it get changed to a physical one so that Jesus would come back and reign on a physical kingdom on this earth? That's going backwards, isn't it? It's totally absurd to think once Jesus is reigning as King of Kings and Lord of Lords in heaven, that he'd ever come back and anyone could think that would be a great thing, that he's ruling over the earth. He already does. It's just, anyway, we'll talk a lot about that in looking at the book of Revelation. But anyway, we've already talked a little bit about him complaining to the Lord, but in one place, chapter 20, verse 7, he says, "Oh Lord, you deceived me." Well, people can do a lot of stuff when they're stressed, and they say stuff that's not necessarily true. You remember Job? Did he say a couple things that probably weren't exactly accurate, and why he got dressed down really bad? And Job, when God says, "Were you there when I did this and that," and all that kind of stuff, sometimes we say stuff that's not necessarily true. Anyway, once they all went off into exile, he had this to say: build houses and settle down, marry and have sons and daughters, increase in number there, do not decrease. Also seek the peace and the prosperity of the city which I have carried you into exile. This is God speaking through Jeremiah. You might as well build a house because you're going to be here a while. You might as well get married, have sons and daughters because you're going to be here for a while. And so it's me that's carried you into this exile, and I've already told you how long it's going to be. It's going to be 70 years. Then he says, a voice is heard in Ramah, mourning and a great weeping. Rachel weeping for her children, that is the exiles, and refusing to be comforted because her children are no more. They don't exist anymore. Many of them were killed. They will return from the land of the enemy. So he says there's going to be a return, but many of them are dying. Now, this verse here, a voice is heard in Ramah, mourning and great weeping, Rachel weeping for her children. That's referred to in the New Testament. Do you remember where?
When Jesus was an infant, heard Herod's command to kill all the newborn babies.
All right, that's exactly right. So that is an example of a dual fulfillment prophecy that happened with the destruction of Jerusalem then, and many people were killed. And so that when all these babies were killed, the same reaction happened. And so that's why that's quoted in the New Testament. Anyway, as far as the return from exile is concerned, I will restore them to the land I gave their forefathers. So he's going to restore them. They're going to get out of Babylon, and he tells them specifically where. To the land of their forefathers, the land of Israel. They're going back. You could call it home, but it's not going to be much like home when they get back there. And they're very dejected when they see it. So anyway, Jeremiah talks about a day of judgment. This is before the final end in 586. He's not talking about Judgment Day. He's talking about a day of judgment for them. How awful that day will be. None will be like it. I am with you and I will save you. Though I completely destroy all the nations among which I scatter you, I will not completely destroy you. And then he talks about the new covenant, Jeremiah 31. In those days, the people will no longer say the fathers have eaten sour grapes and the children of teeth are set on edge. Instead, everyone will die for his own sin. Who, like he says, the son shall not bear the iniquity of the father shall not bear the iniquity of the son. I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and Judah. It will be like the covenant I made with their forefathers. I will put my law in their I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. So this covenant is going to be a spiritual one. It's going to be one that's here, not out here. And that's what this new covenant was going to be. And that is the time of the Messianic age. Okay, any questions on Jeremiah?
I think of something Jesus said to his disciples, that you will not be able to say, here is the kingdom, there is the kingdom. The kingdom is with you, in you.
Yeah.
In other words, that's something visible, physical, spiritual thing within your hearts.
Yeah. And in essence, that's the way it should always have been. Was God happy when they said, give us a king, give us a king? What did he tell Samuel? They haven't rejected you. They rejected me. I should have been reigning in their hearts, not these other. It was a hard issue even back then. But he says this now, in the time to come, there's not going to be a king like you think there is. There will be a king, and he will reign over all, but his kingdom is not of this world, and it's going to be written in your minds and in your hearts. You're gonna serve me from the heart, and it's pretty interesting that this looking at these things coincide with the Sermon on the Mount, because it's all about heart and having your heart where it needs to be, and that's where true happiness is, and that's also where where a relationship with God is. All right, we have 10 minutes or so, so we'll look at Lamentations. Lamentations is a short book that was written by Jeremiah also. Tradition ascribes the book to Jeremiah, who was an eyewitness to the destruction of Jerusalem. It was probably written around 575, but not later than 516. In other words, we don't know exactly when it was written, but it mentions things that puts it between 575 and 516. It consists of 5 poetic laments. One of them is about Jerusalem. How like a widow is she, who once was great among the nations. The Lord has brought her grief because of her many sins. Jerusalem has sinned greatly and so has become unclean. The Lord has rejected his altar and abandoned his sanctuary. God has abandoned his sanctuary. Where was his sanctuary?
Or
On earth. Where was his sanctuary?
in the temple.
In the temple, and where specifically?
Most holy place.
The most holy place, right in front of the Ark of the Covenant with the angels with the wings.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was in the temple, the Lord's house. What did Jesus say in Matthew 23? Behold, your house is left unto you desolate. Saying exactly the same thing here. God has rejected his altar and abandoned his sanctuary. Jesus said God has done that again in Jerusalem in his own time. So I tried so many times to gather you together as chicks, as a hen gathers her chicks, and you wouldn't let me. Now God's gone. He has left the building, and we know what happens when God leaves. Bad stuff happens. And that's exactly what had happened in Jerusalem in 586. God has left the building. Her king and her princes are exiled amongst the nation. The law is no more. Everything was destroyed. Okay, then about the exile in the book of Lamentations, Jeremiah says this: Judah has gone into exile. She dwells among other nations. O daughter of Zion, that's Jerusalem is Zion. O daughter of Zion, your punishment will end. He will not prolong your exile. So you've gone into exile, but it's going to end. He won't prolong it. It's going to last a certain period of time. Now, concerning his own anguish, he says, my eyes fail from weeping. I am in torment within. My heart is poured out on the ground. I'm just totally ruined by all this that I see around me. I'm so sad for these people. Anyway, then as far as his own enemies, he said, they tried to end my life in a pit and threw stones at me. Remember, he was thrown into that cistern, and he says, this is what happened. They tried to kill me. They threw stones at me. This is while he was still alive. He wasn't alive anymore when they finally threw stones again and killed him. But anyway, you have seen, O Lord, the wrong done to me. Pay them back what they deserve. May your curse be on them. Pursue them in anger and destroy them from under the heavens of the Lord. So you might say he was a little bitter about the way he was treated, even though he loved those people. It's pretty hard when you're in a cistern and having people throw stones at you. It's pretty hard to have a lot of compassion for those people at the moment, even though Jesus had to do it or did it. Anyway, he says this about this is the last page here, about the suffering of the people. Now this is bad, so just be ready to close your ears if you have to. This is quoting from Jeremiah, though, not me. They say to their mothers, where is bread and wine? And they faint like wounded men as their lives ebb away in their mother's arms. Look, O Lord, and consider, whom have you ever treated like this? Should women eat their offspring, the children they have cared for? How the gold has lost its luster. Even jackals offer their breasts to nurse their young. But my people have become heartless like ostriches in the desert. The children beg for bread, but no one gives it to them. The punishment of my people is greater than that of Sodom. With their own hands, compassionate women have cooked their own children. Women have been ravished in Zion and virgins in the towns of Judah. This is describing how bad it got in Jerusalem before the final end came. People were so desperate to eat, they wouldn't feed their children. Instead, when the children died, they would cook them and eat them. That happened also, no surprise, that happened in 70 AD. When we get there, study Matthew 24, I'm going to read you a passage out of Josephus, which is just as hard to read as this one right here. So things were not good. And why was all this destruction coming upon them? Because they rejected God. They wouldn't let this benevolent God who wanted to rain down blessings on them, they wouldn't just give themselves over to him and let him be their king. They wanted to be like everybody else. There's a lesson in there somewhere. I think we all know what the lesson is. Anyway, that's when we come back from Arizona, we'll tackle Ezekiel and Daniel and then the minor prophets. Any questions or comments before we stop class? All right, thank you guys for your attention. Wish it could have been a little bit more uplifting, but got to hear the truth before you can understand the gospel. Hear the bad news, and then you appreciate the good news. This morning's scripture reading is from Matthew chapter 7 and also Luke chapter 6. Matthew says what Jesus was talking about, and Luke says the same things, but he also throws in a couple of verses to add just a little bit different thought to it. In Matthew chapter 7, he says, "Judge not, that you be not judged. For with what judgment you judge, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. Give," and Luke adds this in there. He says, "Give, and it will be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be put in your bosom. For with the same measure that you use, it will be measured back to you." So he's saying the same thing as Matthew quotes Jesus as saying, but he adds that business about good measure, pressed down, shaken together. We're going to be talking about that in the lesson. So I wanted to add that in for the scripture reading.